This is the Simply Home podcast, Ladies Who Build, a podcast for women by women. This is Ashley Wainscott
and Michelle Mullins. After spending the last 10 years revolutionizing the construction industry and raising the bar of the contracting world, we are inviting you on our journey as we continuously learn how to be extraordinary and thrive in this industry. Now come hang with us.
All right, season 3 of Ladies Who Build. This is episode 27. This is the playbook for additions. So summary of key points are we're going to do a little introduction into additions. We're going to talk a little bit into how to prep for them. And we're going to then talk about what to consider when thinking about an addition. And we'll roll next into working with an architect and the different parties that you'll have involved with an addition. And then we'll go over in general some elements of the run of show. We will talk through the actual construction pieces and variables, and then we'll wrap up with just a few little secrets to a successful addition. All right, let's dive in, shall we?
Let's do it.
So we were going to talk about like an intro into additions of why you would do an addition.
Yes. And we've come across, there's different reasons why people would do an addition. I think one of the most common ones we see is that you just need the extra space with a growing family. You love your neighborhood, you love your neighbors, you love the environment that you're in, so you don't necessarily want to move. So keeping your existing space, and if your lot allows for the addition, may make sense in that instance for you to go down that path. You could also consider if your existing layout isn't really conducive for a remodel. So that could be multiple reasons. Like, let's say you're in a historical district and it's really tough to modify your existing home without jumping through a lot of hoops. That definitely exists in Austin. It could be that your layout is really funky and you have all these like load-bearing walls that would be really expensive to take down. So you might want to leave those put. So maybe your existing layout just doesn't really make sense to do any remodeling. It could also be that your home doesn't necessarily compete with your neighborhood. So let's say you live in a really small, whatever square footage house, but the rest of your neighborhood are these large remodeled homes or these large new builds, and you're kind of the small man on the block. Then you might consider, okay, for resale value, I should probably add some square footage to our place if we're really going to compete with our neighbors. And then lastly, you just don't want to move, like obviously that's a pain in the booty and it's expensive. And especially if you have little kids, like going through a move sounds bonkers in that case. So you might just say, hey, we like where we are, but we're going to add on, not going to move.
Or if you have 3 dogs.
Who would ever have
Or if you have a big dog family. Everything you were describing was my life, though, when you're like, you're outgrowing your house, but you love your neighborhood, you love your neighbors, right? But you're like trying to figure out how to stay in the house. That I'm like, you stay in that house and you do an addition and work with an architect and work with somebody that can utilize your lot and your home to make the best living situation possible, but also for it to not be crazy expensive, right? Like we all know additions, which we'll get into later, but they cost hundreds of thousands and it's an investment. So it's not something you're going to want to do and then move out in a year. It should be something you're thinking about long term.
Yeah.
That's what I would really consider. Like you're not going to do an addition and then make it a rental property.
Well, right. And, if you're like where you are, you're in a really good neighborhood and your value of your property is just going to continue to appreciate. So it doesn't, the time that you've been in your house, you're just building more equity in a really good neighborhood. So it does make sense, in your case, if you have space, it probably would make sense for you guys to do an addition because you're like, I don't want to get rid of this property anytime soon. Like you're just racking up the equity, which is great.
Yeah, I appreciate the appreciation. That's what
Uh-huh.
it's a double
Yeah.
appreciation. But then also, I was thinking about HOA is probably a little bit of a pain depending on where you live. So
True.
that could be a consideration of like my neighborhood doesn't have an HOA, so I can just like willy-nilly do whatever as long as the city says it's okay.
Yeah. That's so nice.
As Michelle rolls her eyes.
I know because I don't hate it. It's just HOAs, like why? Why do they exist? They're so strict.
Why? Why do they exist?
I
I was Instagram scrolling and saw a comment. Someone was griping about their HOA running away from their HOA, either like president on the street, whatever they were doing. They had recorded a video of them like running away from them because they were like, I don't want to talk to them.
Oh my
And
gosh.
all the comments were people from Europe being like, what is an HOA? Can somebody please explain to me what is an HOA? What's the point of this?
I can tell you.
Nobody knows.
Not tell you. Great question. Another podcast episode.
Oh, right, we'll get there. Okay,
Yeah.
so the other thing to consider, we also, Michelle and I made note of, was the length of time and where you're going to be living, because the length of time Michelle and I were talking about is going to be at least a year, right? Like by the
At
time you
least.
get through planning and construction,
Right.
it's going to be substantial amount of time. I mean, especially if you're doing a bigger addition or you're adding bathrooms. It's not like you're just building out an attic or something. You know, if you're doing a full-fledged addition, that's going to be very time intensive. And then we also had like Michelle, you were talking about specifically the that you can't live in the home when you're doing an addition if you're remodeling over 50% of the home,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah. So if you are doing an addition, or even if you're doing a remodel that's more than 50% of the home, you cannot live in the home because the city of Austin, well, this is Austin, I don't know anywhere else, but um, you can't live in the home because it's a safety hazard. They don't want any of the utilities and the electricity up and running because there's so many like live wires and obviously everything's like during construction. And so it's just a safety hazard. So you actually do have to move out during that time. So there are ways you could kind of work around it. Like you could do like a temporary power pole and we could bring electricity to your property that way. But again, that's additional cost. You have to get a separate permit for that. And you still have to be without electricity and water for certain periods of time when work is happening and when the inspections are happening. And if you fail an inspection, then we have to get it re-inspected, and that can take a couple of days. So it's like it's really hard to live in a home when that's happening. It's not impossible, but I also think literally just for sanity purposes, I would move out because like you were saying, Ashley, it's like the length of time you're probably looking at like at least 6 months of construction, if not longer. And just your sanity during that is going to go out the window. You will turn cray cray if you are going to live through a remodel at some point. So save that sanity. Just move out.
Michelle and I can vouch for you losing your mind. We know it will happen. And you should budget that for your addition project. Budget that you're going to be living out of your house. Or, I mean, maybe you just drive yourself a different kind of insane and live with friends or family. I mean, like move back in with your parents if they're close by, or you can. It'll be a different kind of insane, but it's still a little insane. We've
Yeah.
had lots of clients rent Airbnbs, rent short term rentals, and then they can continue somewhat enjoying their life while we're tearing apart and rebuilding their home. Yeah. So just like, take that advice with what you will. We've had people that have also lived through smaller addition projects, such as making a screen and porch part of their home. And, those areas are closed off and they're not even needed as far as living. in their home. You know, it's not like they walk through that space every day, um, but yeah, I mean, it's a test to your patience, I could imagine.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's just important to understand like the process and asking questions, like go through that process and ask questions and ask what it's like. And honestly, like not everybody can afford to move out, and that's okay. Your contractor who you're working with will work around you and will help you with that and kind of maybe show you, okay, could you at least stay out this week when we don't have power or water? Could you stay out maybe during the loudest time, which is demo, you know? And so you could kind of play with it, but yeah, I mean, if you are able to move out the full time, that's the best case scenario, and then you could meet on site once a week with your project manager. Um, but if you can't, it's not the end of the world. Like people figure it out all the time, and we would work with you on that.
Yes, we will. Because we're great like
Yeah,
that. Also, prep wise, when you're thinking about prepping, you're thinking about, I think the first thing you honestly think about is this feasible and what is my budget, which is
yeah,
kind of part of is if this is feasible.
yeah. It's huge, huge part of that.
Yeah, like do I have the funds to do it? And I mean, before investing in an architect, I would suggest talking to a contractor like us that could get you an idea on average what an addition would cost. I wouldn't Google it because I've even Googled remodeling costs before, and I'm like, that, there's so much variance that I would just talk to a contractor, talk to several who you would plan on using, and get an idea of budget, and then start thinking through if it's feasible. So, like, start to talk to an architect, get an idea too of their costs, and feasibility also means like your easement, or like are you limited with impervious coverage, are you not able to do an addition because of some particular reason. It's definitely part of it's part of what you have to invest in to figure out if you can even do it. Like you have to invest money to figure out if you can do it.
Yeah, and like your architect, whoever you end up choosing for the architecture, will help you with that, so they can do a feasibility study, and then they can tell you like, okay, yes, it's possible, but it has to be this size, you know. So they'll kind of run you through that. Um, and I think too, when you're like asking around for architects or designers, also consider what their time frame. What I'm like recently running into is like, oh, I love this architect, I love their style, but oh, they're 6 months out before they can even get me anything. So like you kind of also want to consider the time frames of what these people you're talking to are like can actually do. And maybe 6 months is fine for you. Maybe you're not in a huge rush because you love this architect and you love their design. That's great. But that's kind of something I've actually recently been running into. I'm like, oh, well, how far are you even out? Because I need something like next week, you know,
Yeah.
which is not
So
possible.
all of a sudden that list is more limited. I mean, that's probably going to be like your first question now on these calls is like,
Yeah.
are you available now?
Yeah. Or how far booked out are you? I mean, you'd be surprised. They definitely book out.
But yeah, I mean, hiring a good architect's part of it. It's like probably what the journey that you're on, because you want to find somebody who knows the ground, right? Like the actual soil, and understands where you're building. So, like on the east side, working with a architect and structural engineer that understands the movement of the ground, or like understands if something's harder to build on, and then understanding city laws around, like when I was looking at addition for my home, I was talking to the architect about the McMansion rule, right? And how you're limited in how much you build onto your current home and the current neighborhood. So there's just all kinds of rules that if they're knowledgeable, it will save you a lot of money and headache.
Yes. And in that interview process, I would ask to see examples of work that they've done with additions. Like some architects have only done brand new spec new builds, some have only done additions, some have only done remodels. Like, so not to say that they can't do any of those cross do any of that, but you kind of want to see their portfolio, because I think what you were talking about is so important, of how the addition ties into the home, not just structurally. I mean, that's where your engineer will help, but also aesthetically. You know, do you want something that's like super modern and beautiful, and it has like a stucco exterior when the rest of your house is siding and maybe traditional style, right? So I think there are certain aspects that you want to ask, and questions you want to ask, like what other work have you done before? Have they even worked in similar neighborhoods? Maybe you have a certain style home. If you have a bungalow home and you're doing an addition, that's going to look different than if you have like a sprawling house outside of in Westlake that you have all this land to build on, right? Like those are two different builds and styles. So I think that's a really good point. But yeah, even if people say like, oh, this is my forever home, I'm never moving, that's great. But you still want to think about resale when you're doing this design and this layout, because you just don't know what's going to happen in your life that you need to sell, and you don't want it to be like a totally bonkers house. But also I don't know, you just never know in life. And so even if you say this is your forever home, beautiful, wonderful, amazing, never move, but you don't want to design it that way,
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, the only thing the only exception I could think about would be the clients where we remodeled their bathroom this last year, and they're older, and they were like, these are going to be my last years, and like this will
Oh
be my
yeah.
last remodel. And I was like, that's really sad. Like the fact that
Yeah.
they were even saying that out loud, I was like, oh, like knowing that they had
Yeah,
an end that they were going to, right?
I know.
But
I mean,
anyways, even
yeah, in
even
that
then, like maybe in that case you just do whatever you want. But even then, like if you want to leave your house to your kids or whatever, and you do and you do something so bizarre that they can't really sell it, or they have to fix it first, like you don't want to go out like that.
no,
Or I don't.
no. Well, at that point, you're probably like, I literally don't care. So you're probably,
Yeah.
so maybe if you want it,
Leo
you leave a bad mark on the family.
Little Leo would be like, damn you, mom, because I'm like, I painted the whole house pink, and then I put a hot tub in the middle of it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's been done.
Yeah. I mean, there was that Pepto-Bismol house,
Oh, I'll
remember
never.
up north?
Wow. Yeah, we've done some funky stuff. Okay, so next on what to consider when you're doing an addition, we've talked about this a lot on different episodes, but you, I would say your budget, you need to be like so friendly and understanding of your budget to a T, because additions are tricky. They are more difficult than a brand new home build, and they take longer, and they can be more expensive, because you're not relaying all new PVC for your plumbing. You are tying in to what's an existing house already has, which could be very, very old piping. And we have to tie in with new piping. Same for electrical, same for HVAC. So all of these things are considerations that you don't necessarily need to like worry about, but they are things that you want to make sure you're including in your budget. So of course, your contractor is going to help you with your budget. Your architect's going to help you with your budget. You can understand numbers ahead of time, and they'll give you that breakdown. But when we say plan appropriately with your numbers, is you want to make sure you have a really good contingency for your project. So if you are in this situation where you saved up all this money, you're ready to do an addition, but this is every penny you own is going towards this addition, and you cannot go over this number or you are screwed, then the addition is not right for you at this time, because there are going to be things that come up. We don't know what they are, but they will come up. And you need to be prepared to pull the trigger of like, okay, yes, let's do it. Okay, let's not do it. There are some things that you're going to have to do, to keep moving forward. So especially because you're pulling permits, and the city might call out something that they want to see done that's not even on the plans. They just want to see it done. So you have to just make sure that like you're not putting everything you've ever owned money-wise into this project.
10 out of 10 would not recommend.
Yeah.
Yeah, leave yourself some space and some cushion to live. And I think it's also going to make you a little bit of a happier person while you do the project if you are not kicking and screaming if there is something that comes up or something that has to be changed. Because if you are penny pinching and that is such a tight budget for you, you're going to make yourself miserable and the teams that you're working with miserable, right? And I don't know about you, but the people that I spend a lot of money with and want and are building my home, I want to have a really good relationship with them.
Yeah.
So I would just keep that in mind with like the contractors you're working with is, you want to be mentally in a good place because you want to treat them fairly. You want to treat them like they deserve because they're building out your home,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, no, agreed. And we've seen, like, we say that because we've seen, like, when money is a massive stressor for a couple, then that gets argumentative with each other, with them, and then it gets argumentative with us. And so all these emotions run high when maybe they didn't necessarily need to, but everyone's like just stressed out because of the budget. And then it stresses us out because we're like, oh my gosh, like, what if a change order comes up? They're not going to be able to afford it. Like, then we're freaking out about your money when that's not our problem, right? And so like it gets kind of really convoluted for everybody. But yeah, I think that that's like a big factor to really consider. And again, a good contractor will tell you what your percentage contingency should be, because you can also ask them in the past what has been y'all's contingency amount on previous additions, and we would be able to tell you that.
Yeah. And too, Michelle, I was thinking asking contractors about what has come up for them in the past on projects, like what situations have you guys been in with additions, just to get an idea of the unforeseen for the client so they could understand kind of that educational piece, right? So like some things that don't come up necessarily during construction, but I was thinking about how particular our city is with trees, right? And something that's come up with for us during construction, like mid project, will be the inspector coming on site. He's marching on in his boots and he's like, I need you to remulch around these trees. There's been too much foot traffic. And for all of those in the world that don't know, when you're working on a remodel or addition, you have to protect the trees around where you're working. So, like covering them with wood, putting a fence around them, mulching them. And then so if there's a lot of foot traffic, something we haven't always planned for that's dependent on the inspector is if you need to like relay the mulch or reinstall the fencing, because storms happen and foot traffic happens and things change. It's not just a one-time prep setup.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not that that
Gosh.
matters to the client, but
No.
okay. So the other thing that we were going to talk about with additions that we figured out with a project years ago in Terrytown is that if you are adding a bathroom onto your home, part of the feasibility prep that you need to do is checking the water meter and making sure that it is capable of handling the capacity of any additional water areas, water faucets, laundry rooms, kitchens, bathrooms, sinks, whatever it is. You need to know that you have capacity for it, because if you don't, you'll be giving the city, I think years ago it was, we haven't thankfully had to do this in a while, upgrade the water meter, but I think it was like up to 10,000 give it for the city to upgrade the meter. And then you have to upgrade the main water line, which that could be 20 to 30 to 40,000 depending on like how long the line is and if there's limestone that we have to dig through. And obviously then you have landscaping to go back over that or on top of it. So long story long, you're $30 to $40,000 deep planning for a bathroom, and that's something you should know up front to decide if you really want that bathroom.
Right. And like some alternatives your plumber, I mean, your contractor would tell you is like, okay, yes, I want the bathroom, and maybe your existing meter could handle that additional size of a bathroom, but it couldn't necessarily hold kitchen and laundry and all of that type of plumbing. So you could get creative with like, is this necessary? And if it is, this is what it's going to cost additionally. But yeah, there's a lot of like big ticket items like that that could come up. Electrical panel, you probably are going to need to upgrade um, because your existing probably it doesn't have enough space for a whole addition on your home. So that's a big ticket factor. And then
HVAC.
yeah, HVAC is a big one too, because you want to talk with the HVAC technician, which your contractor would bring out, but to see like what would be the proper airflow. Like, let's say your ducts are really badly installed on your existing home and you're not getting already proper airflow, you might need to redo the whole system. Again, that would be like in the long run, it's better and it's more cost effective because you're like appropriately distributing air. But that's like another factor is like, okay, well, maybe you can't just add on a duct with your existing house and run it over to the addition. It might be more complicated than that. And so then you want proper ducts and you want proper airflow in and out because then that could cause mold if it's not getting enough proper air. So, I think electrical, HVAC, plumbing, I guess foundation could be a big one too, but those are kind of like your big ticket factors that you'll want to make sure you've done your due diligence with your architect, with your contractor, and ask those questions ahead of time because those can get you.
Oh, they'll get you.
Yeah.
They'll get you all right. Yeah, all the decorative trim out, that's a little bit more controlled costs, but those three main things, those can add up if you're not thinking through them ahead of time. Yeah, and HVAC, that's one thing that I'm always blown away with. I feel like I learn something new with HVAC every single time we're working on a project. You think it's all simple, but it's actually not whatsoever. And I always think I somewhat understand it, and I feel like I do, but I feel like I don't at all at the same time.
I know. And every time I learn something new about it, I'm like, whoa, I didn't know that. That seems like a big deal. Like there's just always these like big things. Yeah, big things to consider.
I know. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I would fail or like drop out of HVAC school.
Yeah, it's like super intense. But then could you imagine electrical? Like even electrical, that's like even more confusing.
Again, even though I feel like I understand the basics, then they throw something at me out of left field that I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
okay,
Man.
well, this is why you're the licensed electrician and I'm not.
Yeah, why we pay you so much money. But and City of Austin electrical code changes every 2 years. So then you're like, well, I literally never know now all the things they have to do because I have to know a whole new rule book. Like it's bonkers.
Yeah, and it will usually wow me in that it may bite me every 2 years, and that like when it comes out around that transition period, I always remember there was 1 years ago where they changed how many outlets you had to have on an island or peninsula.
Oh yeah,
Like,
that was the whole thing.
remember that? And it was like every so many feet. And so it was like all of a sudden you had to put in more boxes in an island or peninsula. Like it wasn't even an option anymore. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I need to remember this code because we were between like bringing on all these projects, but then the code had changed, so then you had to adapt to the new code." And it was like we were in a pickle.
I know. Ugh, yeah. And then it's like they'll wait to call it out at the end of the project, and you already have finished.
Yes.
Everything's pretty and it's nice, and then they're like, "Oh, you need 3 additional outlets on this island." You're like, "What? The countertops are already installed. Like, what do you want me to do?" So then we have to get creative.
Yeah.
And I think we did like an electrical strip like underneath the countertop, and he said that was sufficient. Which, like, thank God.
And Michelle, you were talking about windows too, right? Like
Yes. We've done some additions where some people will go like all out and they'll go really nice black frame windows, gorgeous on their addition, but then their like main house has like the white, um, not plastic, but the white,
vinyl.
vinyl material for the windows on the main house. If it's like in the very back of your addition, no one can see it unless you're in the backyard. And maybe later down the road, you're going to replace all your windows. Cool. But windows are really expensive. So then I think that's something to consider is like, am I going to match my existing house, or am I going to go, all out and go for the nice black windows? But then you want to consider, how does that tie into your existing house? So that's like, again, something to consider. And then also your roof line. Are you doing the same roof shingles? What's the exterior going to look like? Is it going to match your existing siding? What we've also learned the hard way is siding is really hard to match because it's like tile. They only make they don't keep making the same brand of siding. It's like always changing. So if you have a 19 house, you're like, well, I can't get that same siding. What am I going to do now? So maybe you have to paint the whole house.
Yeah, and think about how we had to get them custom made. We were in several predicaments where we had to get custom made siding for those older homes, and it was very costly.
Yeah,
it's not just like readily available. It was expensive. Siding wise, there's a lot of little elements that the contractors have to think about because they have to know if you need something custom ordered or not. And if they're not doing that due diligence up front, then you're going to pay for it in the end.
Yeah.
Same thing with materials. If you're not thinking about when things are going to be arriving, it's just going to delay your addition further and further and further. I was listening to a client was talking about that with a past remodel or addition in the last couple of months. And I have this issue where people tell me things, but I can't recall who it was. Right. Or where I was or when it was. I just know the information they told me.
Yeah.
But somebody had lived through something like that where they were like, yeah, the contractor hadn't ordered materials. They were ordering it throughout the project. So everything was getting delayed, one thing after another.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that's why you order it ahead of time. You get all the timelines for everything, and then you store it or leave it at the shipping warehouse or whatever. But that's the secret there.
Yeah. Yeah. That can definitely delay you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that is everything with additions that Michelle and I can think to share with you all. If you have an addition project that you're interested in working in Austin, or if you want some advice and you're not in Austin, reach out to us. We will give you all the best advice we can, and we'll plan to see you guys next time.
Yeah. All right. That's all for now. Now that you are hooked for the podcast, you are probably thinking, how can I learn more? Well, sign up for our monthly newsletter to see our newest remodels and the best tips for a stress-free home renovation.
With a few easy clicks, you will get to go even more in depth with us as we go behind the scenes with life, projects, and our team. Go to simplyhome.co for the show notes to sign up. See you next time. Bye, y'all.